Business as normal as we knew it a few months ago is never coming back that way again. There'll be a redefinition of what business as normal. So it's figuring out the how we do business differently that will create that opportunity. But you have to be agile enough to adjust. These are the cards I've been dealt. What am I going to do about it? And in any negative situation, there is a learning and there are opportunities.
Hey, welcome back to the WITS podcast. We are here at episode 16, and we've got an interesting, wicked conversation today with CEO Jeff Rosen from Rosen Executive Search, one of North America's foremost search professionals. This guy's been around for a long time. He's placed some of the biggest, most senior leaders, executives, board members. This dude is the dude we got to listen to. He is going to help us understand exactly what we need to do to become marketable, what we're going to have to do to be successful after COVID when it comes down to recruitment or taking on certain positions. And if you're an organization trying to make some decisions around employment and hiring and, best practices, this is definitely an episode you want to listen to. So I want to kick off with the question of, right now we have a lot of people living in fear. This pandemic, this crisis, even the words pandemic and crisis just instill fear and anxiety. You have companies laying people off right now. You have cutbacks happening. So, fear makes us frantic. It makes us do some crazy things. What do you see companies, or how do you see companies recovering from this when it comes down to employment and keeping staff and talents and stuff like that?
This scenario is one where the whole world was thrown into turmoil simultaneously. This could never have been planned the way it's rolled out. People and companies have contingency plans, what they would do in the event of an emergency. This is certainly a time where you need to invoke those contingency plans. Strategic plans typically would be a 5 to 10 year cycle that companies would be looking at. And that cycle has had to change out of necessity. People are focused on the here and the now, and at the same time not wanting to lose sight of what it is that they'll need to do differently, more in the medium term and long term. But the here and the now is taking a huge focus of what it is that they need to be doing, because a lot of small businesses for sure have had to close. Other businesses have had significant and precipitous reductions in their businesses. And they're all trying to figure out what the path forward would be. For some of them, it's a matter of survival. For others, it's how do we just retain what we're doing and able to keep our complement of people together so that we can continue providing the service or the product that we're offering. And for others who are on a growth trajectory, it's certainly a delay in that. And what does that look like? So it does require very much of a focus on both the short term as well as the long term, and not losing sight of who they are. I think that's the most critical thing. It's what the values are that define that organization and how they can stay true to those values while at the same time dealing with the situation.
Let me ask you this question. How should individuals be reinventing themselves to really be marketable within this world that we're coming? I'm hearing words like recession and depression and, layoffs are happening. And if I'm an individual trying to reinvent myself, trying to become marketable, what are the things I should be doing? Or maybe what are the things I shouldn't be doing?
That's a great question, and there certainly is a time for reinvention. And reinvention happens when people go through different phases in their lives and their careers. Often a recessionary environment is one for reinvention. I can speak from personal experience where I was once in a scenario where I was laid off from a corporate role that I had. I'm an accountant by profession, and I had thought you work hard, you keep your head down, and you'll be taken care of. And that worked for a while, and then it didn't. And so it's what you do when you're faced with that scenario of life being differently for you. It's similar in this regard, where people do need to think of what they would be doing differently. So firstly, it's a matter of understanding what it is that you want to be doing. So have that focus of what it is that I want and what's important for me. Then it's a matter of, do I have the right tools in my toolkit to really be effective at what I'm doing? And if I don't, how do I retool? What are the skills that I might want to get that I don't have? And sometimes that's demographically driven, but other times not. But if you think of what you've admired in other people that you don't have, that you would like to have, this is a perfect time for doing that. And there's a lot that's available online, but there are also other ways of getting some of those skills that you really need to get to go forward. Then it's also understanding the types of businesses where you think you could add value. It's really about adding value, because there are so many people out there who are facing the same dilemma. So what makes you different from anybody else? And so it's that differentiator that is really key. How do I understand what it is that an industry or a specific company that I have interest in is looking for, and how can I contribute to that? And it really is about the contribution that you can make. So it's important to understand all of those dynamics, and to not be too constrained by your background. It's not that your experiences in education aren't relevant. They absolutely are. But you have to be agile enough to adjust. And I have the saying that you plan life and then life happens. And it's how you deal with the part of life happening. These are the cards I've been dealt. What am I going to do about it? And I'm not going to sit here and bemoan my fate. It's really a matter of, yes, going through some of those hard knocks. And by the way, I'm not alone, because everybody's going through it as well. And figuring out what I'm going to do and what I'm going to do differently that will stand out and make a difference.
What are the skills and tools people should be learning? I mean, how do they sort of retool themselves? So, you said something earlier where you're like, yeah, the good old days of showing up early, putting in a hard day's work, grinding. You hear a lot of people talk about, like Gary Vee, they'll talk about like hustling, like you always got to hustle. But what do you think employers are going to be looking for in employees or team members post-COVID? What are the skills they're looking for? Is it the traditional stuff, or are we looking at things like people leveling up on things like crisis management, stress management, emotional intelligence? Talk to me a little bit about what you see happening out there, or what's going to be attractive for employers.
I think it's a combination. From an educational perspective, there are certain professions where you do need a certain education to qualify you for doing a particular role. Certainly, your experiences that you've had are going to be critical in some environments, less so in other environments. But I think that a lot of the skills that employers are looking for are not those types of skills. I think they're more character skills. So it's strength of character, it's resilience, it's agility. So we're on this path as a company, and COVID hits. What do? Do we have the resilience, and is our workforce agile enough to be able to shift and course correct to be what we need to do differently? Because no one planned this. Yes, we have emergency plans, but what are we going to do to deal with those types of situations? It's having a solution orientation. It's thinking through a scenario and saying, well, if this is what we have, what could we do differently? Just think about the types of businesses that seem to have flourished in this environment. Mm-hmm. I'm always of the mindset that in any negative situation, there is a learning and there are opportunities. So what are the businesses that have done well? You think of the delivery businesses for supermarkets, the likes of Instacart. Instacart's revenues are up 450% from December. Who would have thought that would have happened? So how can I be involved in the supply chain, for instance, of working with organizations in how they get food from manufacturers through warehousing to retailers and direct to consumers? Mm-hmm. As an example, think of the airline industry is down dramatically, but an airline like Cargojet, for instance, which is really transporting packages all over the show, is doing really well and hiring. So there are those types of environments. But most importantly, I think what this scenario has created is this understanding of working remotely and just being able to be much more digital than anyone expected. Digital is clearly something that has been growing by leaps and bounds over the last number of years. But if you don't have those digital skills, you need to start developing them, because you need to figure out how you do things differently than what we did beforehand. If you even take lawyers and certain documents that needed to be signed in person, now there are law firms that are offering to take digital signatures, even on things like wills, and trying to figure out using tools like DocuSign of how they could get people to sign documents which will be legally binding differently than what was done beforehand. So it's figuring out what you need to do in that respect, how you can enable working more remotely and figuring out how what you were so dependent on in a physical context and perhaps a manual context beforehand, you can do differently than what you did beforehand. Those are certainly skills that are critical and come more naturally to certain demographics than they do to others. But it really is an appreciation of that. And I'd say more than anything else, what you need is a positive attitude. So you need to just remain positive around how you could do things differently. It might not be your wheelhouse. You may not have been trained in certain areas, but you need to course correct. That's really what you need to do. And so what does that look like? And that's sometimes a journey that you have to go on. It's not that easy to just figure out instantly what is that I need to be doing differently.
Yeah, well, I think part of what we want to do in this podcast, and not just this show, but the podcast in general, is answer some of these questions, which is, giving these businesses and these individuals some of the answers to move forward. And I love what you said there, which is the importance of being, you didn't use the word optimistic, but you use positive, and really having an optimistic energy about moving things forward. McKinsey just released a report which came across my desk yesterday, which was really interesting, that said, if you look at what happened in some of the previous recessions and crises, the 2008 recession, 9/11, it was the companies that doubled down in those times that flourished afterwards. They hired people, they made buying decisions, they kept pushing business through, and it was those businesses that thrived afterwards. So what do you think businesses need to be doing now? Should we be retaining talent? Should we be hiring right now? What are some best practices for us to come out of this successful?
Greg, I've lived through a number of recessions, and in my mind, the businesses that do best are those who invest in their people during these times. And investment in your people takes a number of different forms. The first thing is you constantly got to be communicating with them. You have to be in touch with what your people are going through. One of my biggest concerns about going through this environment is just the mental state of everybody and how people are coping with something that is totally unprecedented in their lifetimes and how they will deal with this going forward and the long-term ramifications of what we're all going through. And I think that it's really important that companies are focused on creating that positive energy through constant communication and being upbeat and trying to motivate their people all the time, but also investing in their people. And so investing in people means, yes, we do need to look at our business. We need to look at whether we should be investing in complementary businesses, whether we should be doing it differently. And if so, do we hire to staff up those complementary businesses that we're doing? Obviously, if businesses are in financial difficulty, it's very hard to invest in other businesses or invest in people. But it certainly makes sense to retain your core people who need to deliver what your service offering is or what your product is. So you need to be doing that. And it is an opportunity to upgrade your talent pool as well, because there are a lot of people who are available that otherwise may not have been available just by virtue of circumstance. And so
right.
I would say selectively look at upgrading that talent. Again, bearing in mind the the whole investment methodology and scenario. For me, when I use the term investment, I think of it around it's embedded in a risk philosophy. You still need to be doing a risk assessment, but I think the way you assess risk is different in this kind of environment than it would be in a very different environment where everyone's going through huge growth and we're in a bull market and so on. I think it really requires you to still be cautious around that risk assessment, but to be looking at it differently.
So what are some of the things that we should be looking at when you say risk assessment? So, what are the factors or the variables I should be considering?
Well, it's whether something, how germane something is to your business versus how opportunistic it might be to be doing something differently. And is branching out into something differently really going to make a huge difference to who we are as a company, what we're doing, or whether it's really going to just be marginal in terms of what it is that we're doing. I think that so many companies are having to have cut back people and just scale according to what the business is today, and that focus on the short term, that as things do start picking up over time, it's going to be quite challenging to re-staff up, to retrain people, and to get to the levels that they might need to be. So that whole risk-reward scenario, if you will, needs to be focused on not only what we're dealing with today as the short term, but how we quite rapidly move into the medium term and long term. I was speaking to a company this week, and they were relating to me that they were looking at getting into a new business. And what ordinarily would take them 18 months or 2 years from a due diligence perspective around what it was that they should be doing, they did in 18 days. And it was just that scenario. We need to make a decision. It's not a scenario of having all the I's dotted and the T's crossed anymore. It's having maybe the I's dotted, but perhaps not the T's crossed. And as long as not having the T's crossed is not detrimental to our business going forward, then we should still go ahead and do this, because you know what? We'll make mistakes. And we understand we'll make mistakes, but we've got to learn from those mistakes. And as long as we don't repeat them, that's fine. And it's that ability to, what the biggest constraint is for so many people, and the number of companies too, is fear of failure. You cannot fear failure. In fact, failure is sometimes the biggest learning you will have. And so go out there, try some things. As long as you can course correct, if things go wrong, then that's okay. But you've got to be willing to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and move forward. And I think that's what's going to be different going forward coming out of this. Companies have had to make decisions without having all the information at their fingertips around what it is that they're going to have to be doing going forward. And some of it will work and some won't work. And they'll just have to be agile enough in dealing with that. Therefore, the kind of people that they'll need to hire will need to be people who can deal with that environment as well. People who maybe are a little less risk averse than they otherwise would have been, who can deal with some of that uncertainty, who are willing to take more of that risk of not everything being known up front. And yes, I'll just deal with this as it comes along. And it goes back to the point that I made before around you plan life and then life happens. It's a matter of what you do when life happens and how you move forward on that basis.
Yeah. I hear you talking about the importance of being flexible and being adaptable and being able to adjust with new information. I think that's a really important piece here, which is as life happens in quotations, that life is you're getting information, and it's about what you do with that, and it's the decisions that you make with it. I also heard, you didn't use these words, but I'll paraphrase, which is the importance of getting back to your entrepreneurial roots, which is, if you look at entrepreneurs, we are risk takers. We are a little bit of fly by the seat of our pants, and we'll throw caution to the wind and make some moves. And yes, we want to be intelligent and rational and we want to think about things like fallout and consequence and the outcome to this. But at the end of the day, we are living in abnormal times right now. So doing things differently, like maybe doubling down right now, making those hiring decisions, bringing in that talent, making those sort of investment decisions as a business is what's going to see us through. What do you think? And I asked you this earlier, and I'm just going to sort of, ask it again in a different way. But what do people need to do to stand above competition? What's going to allow them to sort of rise above the rest?
Well, again, I do think it's the ability to demonstrate that you can add value differently than others who are like you. And some of that is by virtue of experiences that you've had. Some of it, quite frankly, is attitude, the can-do attitude, and the way you think about what could be done differently, and how you could be a catalyst to that environment and what the company is doing. So for sure, anyone looking at making a career change should do their homework around what the company is all about and how they could add value differently, because that's what they need to demonstrate to differentiate from all the other competitors who are looking at that same role and what they need to be doing there. Part of the decision for someone doing it, though, in addition to the skills, is your own personal financial situation. You need to assess that everybody's financial situation is different. If you're highly leveraged, if you have a young family, for instance, if you've got a large mortgage and all these things to consider, then it might impact that decision that you might make. And so you really need to assess your entire environment. But I'll tell you that in a situation like the one we're faced with right now, if we've saved for that rainy day, it's pretty stormy out there right now. And so you may need to invoke that rainy day little umbrella that you had and just get at it to do the things that you want to do. Because if you're looking at another role, you certainly are going to face some uncertainty, and you need to know, you need a contingency plan that if that doesn't work out, I can do something differently, and this is what it might look like. And I have a little bit saved up, and maybe I'll have to dive into my savings or my RSPs if I need to, or whatever it is that I need to do to enable me to pursue that path of what I want to do. It goes back to that risk-reward scenario. Are you willing to take that risk? Do you have the skill set that will enable you to make a viable contribution? And is the upside better than the downside? And if it is, then if you're not that risk averse, then you should go for it.
All right, this is an interesting one, and this just might be more of your opinion versus advice. But I'm hearing a lot of people say things like they've taken on 2, 3, 4 additional roles because of companies doing layoffs and stuff like that. And they are maxed out, and should they be asking for a raise? Right? And what's your thought about that? I mean, is this the time people should be saying, hey, I'm doing more, I want more? Or is this the time for people to just show up and contribute?
I think that this time, this environment in which we find ourselves is not just about us. It's not about me and what I'm earning and my career trajectory. This is a time to give back as well. And those of us who are fortunate enough to still be working should think of it in terms of how we give back. I do not think that this is the time to be asking for a raise. I think we're fortunate if we still have a job. When you just look at how many people don't have jobs, this is my own philosophy. You ask for my opinion, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
If I am healthy and my family is well, and I have a job and I can focus on what I need to be doing and how I can contribute. Oh, and by the way, how I can help those who don't, that's what I should be doing. And I don't think that, I think it's highly insensitive to be requesting a raise at this time. There will be times where you can ask for that raise, and companies don't lose sight of those who contributed during difficult times, but this is not the time to be doing it.
Yeah, no, that's my feeling as well. And, you know, I stand for, or one of my values is, you know, being able to contribute to other people's success. You know, your actions and your decisions create a ripple effect. And that ripple effect either is forwarding or it is destructive. And I always try to think about how my ripple effect is going to contribute to other success. And I like what you said there, which is bluntly, you know what, now's not the time. And I think, you know, in the whole entitled sort of generation, and I'm not making that a millennial thing. I think regardless of your age, we as people have become quite entitled. We expect things, you know. It becomes one of these things that, hey, I showed up and now it should be. So I like that, man. I agree with that. So here's an interesting one. What if someone was going to start a business right now? I mean, what are you seeing out there? What would be some good businesses? You mentioned things like grocery deliveries, right? What trends do you see coming up? What businesses do you see popping up?
I think any business that can cater to the population being able to operate in a virtual environment remotely would definitely be worthwhile. Business as normal as we knew it a few months ago is never coming back that way again. There'll be a redefinition of what business as normal will be. There are a number of elements that will be similar, but there are a number that will be different, and how we do business will be different. So it's figuring out the how we do business differently that will create that opportunity for people. And so it's really even when you think of the medical profession and the technology companies that are focusing on how you can track when people have contacted the virus and who they've been in close proximity with, it's scenarios like that. It's anything digitally related, how I can deliver my product or service differently, digitally, quicker, with less personal contact. All of that is going to take a much greater relevance going forward. And it's staying relevant. What is it that I need to do differently that will stand me in good stead or stand society in good stead for time to come? Because things will definitely be operating differently.
So we're not going anywhere with this virtual world. This virtual world is actually going to become more and more and more, call it the norm and the regular. I mean, I'm in a training business, right? I mean, we are used to putting people in a room together and delivering a session to them for days upon end. And I'll tell you, if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have gone virtual, because I was a traditionalist when it came down to training. I was like, no, you need people in the room. It's the only way to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And what I've actually discovered through this crisis, which forced us to go virtual, forced us to start to be able to deliver online and stuff. I have been blown away at how effective this digital world is, as long as you manage it correctly and you do so. So it's really interesting to see how we're going to be moving forward, and things like brick and mortars and offices and stuff. And, you know, on that note, what's your thought? I mean, are you going to start to see, what do you think is going to happen with offices? You know, what is it like layouts, even just where people are going to be sitting?
That's really interesting, because I live in Toronto. Downtown Toronto has a vacancy rate right now of 1.2%. It's really difficult to find office space. And there's a lot of construction going on of new office buildings. And I've been wondering what the impact of all of this will be, given that so much more can happen remotely. And by the way, downtown space in most major cities is very expensive. And so if you can have a workforce that, or part of your workforce, that can operate remotely, doesn't it make a lot more sense to do it that way? Because you're saving a significant amount of expenditure if you're doing that. So I do wonder what's going to happen with all this office space, and whether there will be more of a glut of office space as companies are realizing that they're able to operate much more effectively than they ever anticipated. I can tell you, when I speak to a number of our clients, they're just blown away at how quickly they were able to take a massive workforce and just have them all operate remotely. Now, are there some challenges? For sure there are. And then you get some questions around security and so on. But it's by and large very, very effective. In certain businesses, there'll be no substitute for the in-person interaction. That will always be there. And it'll certainly be a preferred method of doing business in a number of different businesses. But in many others, they'll figure out that they can be just as effective by operating more virtually. And I think that is going to be a change going forward. And it will impact office configurations too, to your point. I think people will, and companies will realize that the way they've configured their offices may need to change out of necessity because they just don't need to operate that way anymore.
I even think there might just be a blend of both, which is there is a remote workforce out there that is working, but people have a landing like a sort of hoteling sort of environment where they could all go in and just plug in. So this is an interesting one. Automation, artificial intelligence, robots, right? Particularly in things like the manufacturing industry. I mean, one of the biggest costs in the manufacturing environments is labor, right? And where do you see automation, or how do you see automation and robotics impacting not just manufacturing, but call it industries in general? Is there going to be a big push to remove people in order to put in that automated stand?
I think it will be. I think out of necessity, companies are going to have to look at how they can automate more to try and reduce some of the risk of things that happen like this particular virus. And if it's not this one, there will be another one down the road. Hopefully it won't be as severe as this one was and is, but it for sure will be something that will continue. And I think that companies will absolutely be focused on how they can automate more and do things differently. And whether it be certain elements of what takes place in your household, just regular cleaning, for instance, and having these little robots that go around doing the cleaning that it can do, or in business environments, manufacturing, delivery, drones, whatever it might be. I think for sure we're going to see much more of a focus on how things can automate more and how we can reduce that human interaction, which means that people will need to reskill themselves again. And they'll need to figure out how they can do things differently, how they can operate differently, how they can add value differently, and that might require learning new trades, it might require learning new skills, but for sure, I don't think we're going back to the way it was with the same magnitude that it was beforehand. There'll be elements of that, and a lot of this will happen over time, but I think this has been the impetus to really say we have to move forward. When people think of some of the innovation that's out there and some of the commentary around people like Elon Musk and what he's doing, I think there's going to be far more receptivity to that and others wanting to do things similarly to try and plan for the unexpected, which will happen at some point in the future.
Let me ask you this question. What do you see the next trends being in recruitment?
That's a tough one because it's already changed so much. I think that identifying what a company needs is really important. So firstly, understanding what the need is, but then how you get at that is really critical. I think that for sure, everything will be much more technologically enabled than it ever has been beforehand. So figuring out what some of those technology tools might be, whether it's what you mentioned beforehand around AI and how we get at people and knowing who can really step in quickly and make a difference to our business and what it is that we're trying to deliver on it in a timely fashion will be really important. I think we'll see more of the evolution of some of those tools that are out there that will enable companies to get at people. What I think will start happening too is that there will be much more of a focus on this fit with the company. And how that is done, I'm not sure, other than through human intervention. But I'm not the most creative person, but I can build on others' creativity. And I think that there will be mechanisms for making that much more enabled through technology as well than what it is today.
What should people be doing with their social profiles? And we can start with LinkedIn. I mean, are there best practices for what people should be putting on their LinkedIn? As we were talking earlier, it's one of the first places people will go and look to see who you are. Now that we're living in this world of really personal connection because we are working from home and we're Zooming with each other's families and dogs and stuff, is it important to now start to align everything on social, your Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, or should we still sort of be keeping those things separate?
I don't know that they need to be kept separately, but I do think that you need to be consistent and professional in everything that you do. So I would never put anything on LinkedIn that could come back and bite me in the butt, so to speak, because it was inappropriate that it was put on there. It's a very, very effective tool, and a large percentage of the population globally uses it. And so you need to be cognizant of the fact that anything that you put on LinkedIn is out there publicly, no different than other social media. But in a business context, this is the one that is used the most. And so you really need to maintain that professionalism in everything that you do with regard to LinkedIn. And yes, you should be posting information and putting some of your requisite experiences on there, because there are more and more companies that are definitely utilizing it and invoking LinkedIn as a first step in finding people whom they think could make a contribution to their organizations. And as companies are going to be very cost sensitive over the next little while as they come out of this scenario, and who knows how long the impact of this will be felt financially, they will be relying more on their own resources to find those really talented people. For me, it's not a scenario of, I did this, I had this role, and this is what my responsibilities were. It should be more accomplishment oriented. It's to enable the reader to want to read more. The rough rule of thumb is that when someone's looking at a resume, there's about 18 to 20 seconds spent looking at a resume. It would be no different than LinkedIn. So how do I entice that reader to read more? Is it in my profile that I have before they start reading where I worked and what I did? And in terms of where I worked and what I did, if I have a certain role, there's an expectation that a CFO deals with these types of things. They don't want to know that you did these responsibilities as a CFO. They want to know the impact that you had as a CFO. What did I do that really made a difference? Everything is about added value. I'm so values driven in the way I look at life and the way I look at business. I think it's all about how I add value. It's trying to let the reader understand who I am without even having to have a conversation with me. So that when we do have that first conversation, it's a whole different dialogue.
So what I heard you say there is we got to actually look at changing our LinkedIn profile from this transactional, these were my job duties, into here's how I spent my time, here's what I focused on, here's what I accomplished, here's why I did that, here's what I believe. So if I am that CFO, I would speak about some of the decisions and the things I've done for the organization with my time being there, because it's assumed that I know how to use certain things like call it QuickBooks, and I've got my accreditation and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, cool. So Jeff, I mean, look, this has been really interesting, and I think it's a really hot topic right now, because the big question comes down to is what are we going to do to, be really marketable and successful within our careers after COVID. And there's two factors to consider here, the company and the individual. And I think what we've done today is we've answered a little bit of these questions, which I think is great. And I really just appreciate your time being here, because I know you're a busy guy and I know you've got lots going on, and we wanted to get some of your expertise shared to the audience. So thank you, my man.
Thank you, Greg. If I could just say in closing that I think that one of the challenges that a lot of people have is that they do a bit too much navel gazing, and they get really caught up in the here and now. And the here and now is quite negative right now, given what we're going through. And negativity breeds other negativity. And by contrast, positivity breeds great positivity. So that positive attitude is really critical. And so it's not a matter of getting caught up in, when is this going to end? I'm tired of being isolated. I don't want to do this. I really just need to get out. You need to focus on more, what can I do differently? And it's a carpe diem type environment. It's just seizing the moment. It's waking up every day and saying, I need a certain routine. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make these calls. I need to get comfortable with rejection, because that's going to happen. See it as one step towards a yes, and just move forward on that basis, and just know that you're not alone. I think that everyone needs a support system, so it's important that people do build a support system around them. It's a journey. You've got to buckle up. You're going to have speed bumps along the way, and hopefully we'll all look in the rearview mirror in the not too distant future, and this will just be a distant blur. And we'll have moved on into the next phase of our lives, of our work lives, of our personal lives, and they're, by the way, completely intertwined. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Great. I like that ending, which is you got to keep traveling along. You got to keep going down the road. You can't stop. You got to keep moving forward, which is excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked it, don't forget to click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. We are going to make sure that Jeff has got all his information posted down below. So if you want to get in touch with him, he's definitely a dude to talk to. And we appreciate your time. So until then, we will see you next time.
Hey, I'm Greg Witz. Thanks so much for coming and checking out the video. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. So I'd highly suggest that you click this video over here. And don't forget to subscribe and share.